Actually, we're doing Chazara yesterday, reviewing yesterday the Gemara with regard to the source that the Sukkah, the schach for the Sukkah needs to be things that are not makabel tuma, and they have to grow from the ground. And we also talked about the fact that the machlokes of the Yidden dwelling in sukkahs when they left Egypt. What does that refer to? Does that refer to Anani Kavod or the clouds of glory, or was it physical sukkahs? And um, and I mentioned yesterday, it sounds more like just a nice discussion in like Medrash, but we find that it seems like it does have an impact in halacha because at least according to some poskim, you need to actually have in mind what the miracle was when we left Egypt, or what you have to have in mind the reason why we dwelled in why we're dwelling in a sukkah now has to do with what that we dwelt in whatever the sukkah means then. And according to some, according to one understanding is that you have to specifically have in mind Anane Kavod, the clouds of glory. According to the other opinion, you specifically need to have in mind the uh, the Sukkos Mamish, the fact that we actually were in Sukkos, we were dwelling in tents when we left Egypt, and you have to have that in mind. So uh, there seems to be a machlokes really as to who the halacha follows. So we saw the tour yesterday in the Bach that seems the halacha follows the Anane Kavod. And we saw that also in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. It seems that they mention this concept of the Anane Kavod, the clouds of glory, but there seems to be another view, which is the Sukkos Mamish. And the reason to paskin that way is because generally we don't really follow Rabbi Eliezer. We would follow Rabbi Akiva instead of Rabbi Eliezer. So the commentaries all ask, why is the Torah paskening like Rabbi Eliezer when we don't normally follow Rabbi Eliezer? And one of the answers given is that there is another source of this argument. In the other place where it mentions this debate, it actually has the name switched. So you could paskin according to the opinion of that the clouds of glory, because according to the another source, meaning this argument is brought maybe in a medrash in Teres Kayanim, medrash in Vayikra, and over there it actually has Rabbi Akiva saying that the opinion is clouds of glory. So that could be a reason why we paskin according to the opinion of clouds of glory, that's what the Sukkah is commemorating the clouds of glory when we left Egypt, because that's the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, even though our Gemara says that that's the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, but we normally don't follow Rabbi Eliezer, and therefore it could be that that's why some of the places can want to paskin like Rabbi Eliezer, because according to they're following the version that has that's Rabbi Akiva's opinion. There's a question on that because the Targum Onkelos actually is a student. Onkelos was a student of Rabbi Eliezer. And Onkelos says the clouds of glory. So there's reason to say that the Gemara that we have, our Gemara's Girsa, is more correct than the Teras Kayanim, than the Medrash in Vayikra. And the fact that Rabbi Eliezer says it in our Gemara, that's more overriding, that's more of a proof that this is the correct version versus the version in Teres Kayanim, which would mean that we really should not be paskening like Rabbi Eliezer, we should be following Rabbi Akiva. So according to that, you really should follow the other opinion and consider the Anane, the Sukkah is commemorating the real Sukkahs that we dwelled in, and you should have that in mind. However, the question really boils down to, do we really paskin this way? Do you really have to have in mind the exact, is this really the way the Bach explains it? Is this really correct according to halacha? What happens? I'll give you an example. What happens if you ate the first night of Sukkot and you did not have in mind the Anani Kavod or the Sukkos Mamish, and you just did, you're doing a mitzvah. You had in mind, I'm doing a mitzvah, but you didn't have in mind the specifics of the mitzvah. Would you need to go and eat again? So you benched, ate the first night of Sukkot, you benched, do you need to eat again? So according to the Bach, you probably would need to eat again. And however, it doesn't seem that the psak, the halacha, follows that. And it seems that b'diavad, your yaitza, as long as you had in mind you're doing the mitzvah, your yaitza. But the Piskei Teshuvos brings down that you should try to have in mind both reasons. This way you follow all opinions, have in mind both reasons. So that's the way that's what it said. Maybe the Mishnah Berurah seems to mention that. So that would be the ideal, is to have in mind both. Okay, anyway, so we did talk a little about that yesterday, and the interesting thing here about Rabbi Yochanan holds that he comes up with other reasons why we need to have the schach from the ground, and it can't be makabel tuma. So if you read the Gemara simply, Reish Lakish had said, you learn from the clouds of glory. The clouds are something that's come from the ground, and they're not makabel tuma. They're not recipients of impurity. Now, Rabbi Yochanan, the Gemara is not satisfied with that, because why? Because we had another opinion. The other opinion was that Sukkos Mamish, that's not clouds of glory, that when we talk about the dwelling in a sukkah, we're commemorating the real sukkah, the real huts that they dwelled in. And so Rabbi Yochanan has to come up with other reasons why we need schach, why we need it to be kosher schach. No, that can't be makabel tumah. It has to grow from the ground. So Rabbi Yochanan comes up. It seems that there's two reasons, according to Rabbi Yochanan, or according to Rav Dimi said one reason in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, and Ravin said another reason in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. So the thing is, Rabbi Yochanan's not learning from the Anani Kavod. He's giving these other reasons. Why is he not following that view? So Tosfos explains it's not because he doesn't agree that they were Anani Kavod. It's not that Rabbi Yochanan is following the other view, Rabbi Akiva, that it's Sukkos Mamish. In other words, why in our Gemara, who explains about the reason for the rules about what schach is made from? So we had Reish Lakish. Then the Gemara says that doesn't fit all opinions because it doesn't fit Sukkos Mamish. So then we have Rabbi Yochanan. So it sounds like maybe Rabbi Yochanan doesn't agree with Reish Lakish, and maybe there weren't Anani Kavod, or the Torah is not talking about the Anani Kavod. The Torah is talking about the Sukkos Mamish. Maybe that's the argument between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. They seem to be following these different views. Tosfos says no. Rabbi Yochanan has a problem with Reish Lakish's explanation. What's the problem? The problem is that what did Reish Lakish say? That where do clouds come from? Clouds come from the ground, the earth. Ve'ed yalim and aretz. Clouds come from the earth. What does Rabbi Yochanan hold? So he scientifically disagrees. He says that the Ananim come from above. They don't come from the earth. The clouds don't come from the earth. Now, I believe I have to look it up, but I believe we did have a Gemara about this in Chagiga. I don't remember exactly. Somewhere in the beginning of Chagiga, I think I have to look it up, but I think we had a Gemara about this. Anyway, Taisus doesn't bring the Gemara in Chagiga that I'm remembering, but Taisus brings Yushalmi and he brings a Bereshis Rabbah, Medrash, and he says that Rabbi Yochanan is the source of this opinion that the what brings the mist of the clouds, it comes from heaven. Or maybe it was a Gemara in Tainus. Where does the rain come from? That was the question. Where does the rain come from? Does the rain come from Arubais Hashamayim, or does the rain come from the earth? Right. This was a question. It seems like it's touching upon the same thing. Where do the clouds, where do the clouds come from? So Taisus brings sources where the clouds come. That seems to be the argument. And therefore, Rabbi Yochanan can't learn that. How do you know a schach has to be something that grows from the ground and something that's not makabel? You can't learn it from the clouds because according to Rabbi Yochanan, clouds don't grow from the ground. Clouds actually come from the heavens. And so therefore, Rabbi Yochanan has these different opinions. Anyway, that's the Taisus over here goes through that. This is the Pseilas Geir, and that Taisus, he goes through that that point. And the other Taisus over here talks about Reb Zera, where Reb Zera says, wow, Reb Yirmiyah asked such a strong question. He just proved us all wrong. And the term Reb Zera says that we thought we had this clear, and comes Reb Yirmiyah and he throws an axe at it and chops it up and ruins our whole understanding. And Taisus is bothered with, does Reb Zera really learn that the pasuk refers to psilas Gairin v'Yakov? Again, the question that Reb Yirmiyah had asked is maybe it's not the psilas, maybe it's the good stuff of the maybe it's not the yard trash, it's the yard produce, and so Taisus is bothered with another Gemara that doesn't see that. He seems to agree that it does mean the psilas Gairin v'Yakov. So Taisus concludes and he says that really Reb Zera follows the understanding of Rabbi Yochanan that it is the psilas, that it refers to the refuse of the yard. And Rabbi Yirmiyah asked a question, but Rabbi Zera said, I know there must be an answer. I just don't know what the answer is, but I'm not agreeing with you that maybe it does mean the good stuff of the yard. I definitely agree that I definitely follow the view that we said already, and I'm not changing my opinion, but I'm impressed, Rabbi Yirmiyah, that you have a good question, but I'm not changing my view because of it. And that's by explaining it that way, Taisus says it answers up another Gemara where we find that Reb Zera did hold that it meant the psilas Gairin v'Yakov. So how here does he seem like to want to back out? The answer is he's not backing out. He's just acknowledging that there is a question on this. Okay, anyway, so that really brings us up to the Mishnah on Yud Beis Amud Aleph. So we're now holding at the Mishnah on 12a. And for those of you that had a hard time following what I was saying, was all based on, we were building up stuff from the previous 2 days. So don't worry, now we're starting something new. Mishnah on page 12a. It's in the middle of the page. And if you want to know how many lines from the top, it must be, I would say, about 18 lines from the top of the page. Maybe 15 lines from the top of the page. Okay. Chabile kash v'chabile eitzim. So the Mishnah says that if you have a bundle of straw or a bundle of wood, v'chavile zrodim, in a bundle of some type of twigs, that are basically they're moist, and the animals would eat them in this way. But if you want to use them for firewood, then you need to dry them out. So you have these three types of branches: straw, wood, and zradin. And basically, they're all really moist. And people, if they want to use them for firewood, you're going to have to dry them out. So the Mishnah says, "Ein masakhin bahem." You don't use them for schach. Now you can't use them for schach while they are tied, but the Mishnah then says, "V'kulan shehtiron kesheros." But if you do untie them, then they would actually be kosher for schach. And they would be kosher for schach, and the reason would be that if you untie them, then your goal is not to dry them out. If you untie them, then your purpose is to use them for shade. So they're all, if as long as you untie them, you will be able to use them for schach, and you would not need to lift them up for similar to the way we said in the previous Mishnah, that you would need to lift up in the case where you have stuff that's attached to the ground. You need to lift it up. Here, you wouldn't have that problem. You would be allowed to use them the way they are, and it's not an issue of tasev leimen ha'asui, that you put them there in an inappropriate manner, and now you're trying to fix it up. That wouldn't be a problem. So they're all kosher for if you untie them. But kulan ksheres ledefanos, and they're all kosher for walls. And when it says kulan ksheres ledefanos, it refers to anything that was not kosher for schach, even things that are invalid midaraisa, even things that are not kosher from the Torah, like previous laws that previous Mishnahs spoke about, they're also going to be eligible to be walls for the Sukkah. So these laws that we saw about what the schach needs to be made for only applies to the schach, the roof. It doesn't apply to the walls, and the walls of the sukkah would be permissible to be made from other material. So again, the Mishnah, what is the main goal of, what is the main point of the Mishnah? The Mishnah's main point is that there is a rabbinic decree. If you put bundles of twigs or wood, straw on top of your sukkah, you want to use it for schach, for shade, you're not allowed to. Why not? So the reason that we'll see in the Gemara is that because many people do that to dry out. They put it up on top of something and hang it in order to dry it out. And we're afraid that that if we allow you to use this for schach, these bundles, someone might end up putting bundles on their roof in order to dry them out. And then they'll say, well, Sukkot is coming, let's just leave them. Now, if they do that, what would happen? Would that be a problem? In other words, you're putting these bundles there for schach purposes. So you're doing really nothing wrong. You're really doing the right thing. You're putting branches, nothing wrong with putting branches, on your sukkah. That's what the sukkah is supposed to be. The schach is supposed to be branches. You're putting it there for the right purpose, for shade, for a sukkah, for the mitzvah. You have all the good reasons why you're doing it. But the Mishnah tells us you can't use it for schach. Rabbinic decree. Why not? So the answer is because what are we afraid of? We're afraid that you, by doing this, if it would be permissible, then what's going to happen is someone is going to leave these type of bundles on their sukkah for purposes of drying out, not for shade purposes. And then, since Sukkot is coming, they'll say, you know what, let me just leave it there for Sukkot. And if you do that, what happens? Then it's really biblically invalid. Why would that be biblically invalid? Because of the rule that we've learned before. The same reason why you can't use things that are in kosher for schach. You also can't use schach for the purpose of that's not for shade. You put it there to dry out. We learned before that one of the kavanas you need to have, the intent you need to have when you put schach on is that it's for shade. That was a crucial rule. It doesn't have to be for the mitzvah, but it has to be for shade purposes. If you put it there to dry, it's invalid. And if you change your mind afterwards and say, you know what, it's there now for shade purposes, that doesn't work. I'm leaving it there for shade purposes. You put it there for the wrong purpose, to dry. Now you want to leave it there for shade. You put it there in a way that's invalid, and now you're correcting it afterwards. It's like tasav leimin hasu. Oh, it's there now for shade. Yeah, it's there for shade, but you didn't make it in for shade. You didn't do it. You weren't taselacha. You didn't make the sukkah. It's made already. It's v'leimin ha'asui. It can't be made already, and you just fixed up some small little thing. Oh, I'm having in mind now for shade. Okay, now it's good enough.
But you can lift it up.
It is mentioning also. I froze?
Rabbi, you froze. Yeah, but you can lift it up, correct?
So the thing is that do you need to lift it up? If you put it there for the purpose of shade, so it's only a rabbinic problem. If you put it there for a purpose of drying out, then you have a biblical problem. If you have the biblical problem, then you probably would need to lift it up for, untie it and then put it, then lift up each piece. If you only transgress the rabbinic problem, so our Mishnah says all you need to do is untie it. You just untie it and it will be kosher.
But if they were untied and they were on your roof originally for just in order for you to get these things to dry out, and then you decide to do it the other way, then you have to lift them up and then put them back down in order for it to become kosher schach.
Right.
Okay.
Seemingly, you're right. In that scenario, again, you did it. It's biblically not valid, and you would need to put the schach on properly. Okay. Now, the way I answered you, Ezra, is to make it a little more simple. But I do want to mention that there are other views that in this scenario, you do not need to lift up each piece. Even though it's biblically a problem, the way you put it, but when you untie it, when you untie it, that might be called a maisa, and that it's considered that you, that you put it on properly. So there's room to say that that it's okay to remove this issue. In other words, it could be that untying it is considered a maisa. There is a Thurs over here on the other side of the page, where it says, which we'll see. Maybe we'll talk about it when we get there. Okay, so anyway, the bottom line is that we're dealing here with this issue of the purpose people are putting these on top of their sukkah, and if the purpose is for shade, so then it becomes a rabbinic problem because other people might put it for the wrong purpose, and the rabbis made a decree that we're going to have problems later if you do it that way, and therefore the rabbis made a decree you can't use it, even though you put it on for the right purpose, but we're worried about what's going to happen from this. Now, you are allowed to use it for the walls of the sukkah. Okay, Amar Reb Yaakov. So now comes the Gemara. Reb Yaakov says, Shamet minei Reb Yochanan Tarti. I heard two things from Reb Yochanan. I heard two reasons to two laws of Reb Yochanan. One of the reasons is this, on this din about the bundles being invalid for skach. The idach, and the other would be the other Mishnah where it says hachloitet begodish lasois loy sukkah. It's a Mishnah later on. It says that if I dig into the godish, into the piles of grain, bundles of grain, and I remove some of the bundles of this grain heap, and I make a hole that will be now usable as a sukkah. But the only thing is, I did not do anything to make the walls or the schach into a actual sukkah. I just left it be. All I did was dug out an area for myself to dwell in. That is Eina sukkah, is not a sukkah. Now, one of the reasons, so I learned these two things from Rabbi Yochanan, and I also learned two reasons. Now, one of the reasons, one of the reasons why it's invalid is that the rabbis made a decree that if I'm going to permit you using this for schach, you're going to end up using also when it was placed there for a storage. In other words, even when it's not for shade. You're going to end up, one of the reasons why it's invalid is because of the gzeira of Eitzer. Gzeira of Eitzer is the Eitzer literally means like a storage. It's a gzeira decree about a storage. Basically, what they would do would be stick their twigs, their bundle of twigs, to dry. And then once it's dried, they would put it away for the winter when they need the firewood. So the term used is a gezeiras oitzer. It's a gezeira that you're drying it out for the storage. So one of the reasons of these laws has to do with a gezeira, the decree of oitzer, of storage. And the other reason that the sukkah would be invalid was mishum tasa v'loy min ha'asr. Because of tasa, that means that you have to make the sukkah, and the sukkah can't be that it's already made and you just fix something small. So that's the thing that this Rabbi Yaakov said. I heard from Rabbi Yochanan, these two laws and two reasons. And I don't know which of these Mishum Oitzer is because of the reason of the gzeira, the decree of Eitzer, which would mean a rabbinic decree. V'hai minayu, and which one of them would be mishum tasav asi, because you have to make it and it can't be made and you just fix something.
Okay, so I'm heading to Surfside.
So the Gemara says, Amar Reb Yirmiyah nechse yanan. So Reb Yirmiyah says, okay, so let's try to figure this out. So again, we have these two laws. Again, that what are the two laws? One of them is this Mishnah that you can't use schach that are bundles, and the other one is you can't make a sukkah out of digging into a grain heap. So you can't, these are two. Which one is biblically prohibited? Which one is rabbinically prohibited? One of them is a rabbinic law about the gzeira of Eitzer. One of them is biblical because it's tasav leimena asi. But Reb Yaakov says, I'm not sure which one is which. I don't really know. I don't know what where to connect the dot. Where to draw the lines. Which line is connected to this? This is the reason for that law, and this is the reason for the other law. So Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah so Rabbi Yirmiyah says, let's see ourselves how we could explain the words of Rabbi Yochanan according to these, with his reasons. So Dam Rabbi Chia Barabba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Chia Barabba says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that so what's the reason? Why can't you use these bundles for schach? Well, what's wrong? They grow from the ground. They're not a kabel tumah. So he says, what's the reason? Because sometimes someone's going to come from the field, ba'erev in the evening, and his bundle is on top of his shoulder, and he lifts it up, he'll place it on top of his tent, his hut. He places it on top of his hut. And why is he doing that? The reason he's doing that is kedei liyabsha, to dry it out. And then afterwards he says, you know what? Sukkah is coming. Let me just wait around for Sukkah, and I already have my Sukkah all built. Look at this beautiful Sukkah. I have it all built, and we're all set. And the Torah says that you can't do that. So you put it up there for what purpose? In this scenario that he's explaining, that what's going to happen, someone's going to come home and put it there in order to dry, put the bundle of twigs or branches there to dry. And they'll say, let me change my mind. I'm just going to leave it there for my sukkah. And the Torah says, you can't, it wouldn't be valid for schach. So because this is going to be what might come out of this whole thing, therefore the rabbis prohibited, even if you did it for the right purpose, you put it there for shade, it's not valid. So again, the Mishnah is confusing here. The Mishnah is talking about a case where you did it for the right purpose, but we're afraid what's going to happen from that is that sometimes someone's going to do that for the wrong purpose, and you'll think it's kosher and it's really not kosher. It'll be biblically prohibited, and therefore the rabbis made a decree that even if you do it for the right purpose, we're not allowing it. Yeah, it's not kosher. Okay, so now midaha from this, from the fact that this is mishum gzeras Eitzer, from the fact that this law of our Mishnah is the gzeira of Eitzer, so we can learn that the other Mishnah must be the biblical law, that mishum tasav leimenos. So this law of digging a hole in top of, inside a grain heap, where you have bundles of grain that are all piled on top of each other, and you remove some of the lower ones in order to have a place to make your sukkah. So that must be the reason, is a biblical reason, because there you're actually transgressing a biblical law that you're not making the sukkah, all you're doing is making a hole. But the sukkah is there already, and you just made a hole. That would be a problem of tasev v'loimin ha'asui. That would be a different problem, a biblical problem, a much worse problem. And in that scenario, it would be invalid. Okay, it would be because of tasa. So now we've sort of explained what must have Rabbi Yochanan said. And now the Gemara says Rabbi Yaakov, in this statement of Rabbi Yaakov was unsure how to explain it because he didn't know this explanation of Reb Chia bar Abba, and therefore he didn't know how to translate our Mishnah. Is our Mishnah talking about a case that you did it for the wrong reason? Maybe the Mishnah is talking about a case where you did it for the reason of drying out, and then you changed your mind. So you could theoretically learn our Mishnah and say that it's ein mesachkin b'hem, can't use it because it's tasav lemon asli, not because of a rabbinic decree. You could possibly learn the Mishnah a little differently, and say that he's talking about a case where he put it there in order to dry out. We're learning the Mishnah that he put it there for the right purpose, and it's only a rabbinic decree, and that is based on the fact that we understand the reasoning is Reb Chia bar Abba in the name of Reb Yochanan said a reason. But if you learn it the other way, then you might come out that you would have the same problem that Rabbi Yaakov had, that he didn't know which one is connected to what, which one is the rabbinic problem, which one is the biblical problem. Okay, so the Gemara asks a question. What's the question? Amar Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi says, is this the problem? That it's only a rabbinic decree and it's not the tasav leiman asui problem? Maybe that's actually the reason of learning. Maybe that's the meaning of the Mishnah. And it will be biblical. In other words, the way Rabbi Yaakov was questioning it, Rav Ashi says, maybe that actually is the way to learn the Mishnah. You think the problem of chaytet begadish is only a problem of biblical tasav leiman asui, and it's not a problem of rabbinically that you might end up coming to a biblical problem, but it's only a rabbinic law? Maybe you could learn that Mishnah that's later on in our tractate, in our chapter, that the Mishnah is talking about, that you took the bundles out of the area in order for you to dwell there. And maybe you shook the sukkah, you shook it up and made it kosher, and still it's going to be prohibited rabbinically because we're afraid that maybe someone's not going to shake it and lift up the stuff. So in other words, the Gemara is asking, the Rav Ashi is asking, that could be that you can learn the opposite way. That our Mishnah is talking about the biblical problem. That Mishnah is talking about the rabbinic problem. How does he know to learn it this way, not the other way? So the Gemara answers, Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Lach, and Rabbi Yochanan will answer you that you could see it from the Mishnah. Hacha detani ein mesachken bahem. Here, the Mishnah uses the term, we are not mesachich bahem. And lechatchilahu de'ein mesachichin. Preferably, the way it sounds is like it's saying it's preferable. Of course, Rashi doesn't. Taisus, removes this this word lechatchila, and he just says it would be ein mesachkem behem who. I'm sorry. Hacha dektani ein mesachkem behem. Skip out the word lechatchila according to Tosfos. So here that it says you're not mesachik behem who the ein mesachkem mishum gzeres oitzer. When it uses such a term, ein mesachkem, we don't do that. It sounds like it's rabbinic. Ha'da'araisa shaper dummy, but biblically it would be okay. But hasam dektani ein a sukkah, there that it says it's not a sukkah, there that it says hasam dektani ein a sukkah afilu di'eved, even b'di'eved, or according to Tosfos, you remove the word b'di'eved. Midaraisa nami ein a sukkah would mean even biblically it's not a sukkah. What does this mean? What this means is, let me just read it according to both ways of reading it. Let me read it with the lechatchila, different than Tosfos says it. Let me read it again. The bottom line. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Lach. Rabbi Yochanan will tell you, Hacha dektani ein mesachtem behem, where it uses a term. See, there's two terms that the Mishnahs use. One is we don't use this for schach, and the other one is that it's not a sukkah. Which one sounds more harsh? We don't use it for schach, or it's not a sukkah. It's not a sukkah sounds a lot more harsh. That means because biblically this ain't no sukkah. We don't use this for schach sounds like, chevra, friends, don't do that. Don't do it this way. Better don't do it. It sounds like it's a rabbinic law, even though it's kosher, but we shouldn't do it this way. Something bad might happen from it. Something negative, some mistake is going to happen. Ein mesachtem. So that's what the Gemara is basically saying. The Gemara uses the word, now we'll do it according to the way it's written in the Gemara. It says, Rabbi Yochanan will tell you, here it says, Ein mesachim behem. Don't use these bundles of straw for schach. It sounds like lechatchila, preferably, hu de ein mesachim, is that you shouldn't use it for schach. Mishum gzeres oitzer, because of this rabbinic decree that you might end up at some point putting these bundles to dry in order to use for your storage. Later for the winter, you're going to want to have dry firewood. And you're going to end up saying, you know what, instead of putting it for instead of bringing it to my storage, let me leave it there for schach, and we'll have shade. And that would end up, that would end up being a big problem. And therefore, the rabbi said, even if you're doing it for shade, you can't do it. It's a gzeira because of this story of oitzer. Hadaraisa shapridam. But biblically, it actually is fine to use for schach. It's only rabbinically we're afraid something negative will come out from this. Some mistake is going to come out of it. Gzeira oitzer. Now, hasam, but over there, in the case of choitet begadish, where you're digging out bundles and using the area that you dug out to dwell in for your sukkah, but you never really fixed up there, the case was that you just dug out a hole. So the wording, diktani ein a sukkah, it says it's not a sukkah, that makes it sound that afilu di'eved, even after the fact, midaraisa nami ein a sukkah, it's not even biblically, it's not a sukkah. So that's the simple way of reading the Gemara. Tosfos doesn't like these words, lechatchila and di'eved. Why do you think Tosfos doesn't like these words, lechatchila and b'di'eved? What's the main difference here? The main difference is one of them is rabbinic, one of them is biblical, and you see it from the law, the way it says the law. If it says the law, it's not a sukkah, that sounds like it's biblical. If it says the law, don't do this, it sounds like it's rabbinic. Or we don't do this. It sounds more rabbinic. If it says this is not a sukkah, it sounds like you're being very strong and saying this ain't no sukkah. This is a zero. This is worthless. So that's the main point. The words lechatchila b'diavad that the Gemara uses, it does express an idea, an element of one is more harsh, one is more light. That's these terms. However, they give off the wrong impression, Taisa says. Why? Because lechatchila and diavad are often used when something is kosher after the fact. That lechatchila, you're not supposed to do this, but if you did it, it's kosher after the fact. I'll give you an example. What would happen if you ate in a sukkah that had bundles of straw on top of it? You ate in such a sukkah. On the first night of Sukkot, and that's the main mitzvah, the big mitzvah of eating, and the sukkah is the first night. The other days of Sukkot, if you don't eat in the sukkah, so as long as you don't eat, you didn't do any sin. You don't need to. You're not eating. You don't need to eat in a sukkah. If you're eating, you got to eat in a sukkah. But the first night, even if, however it is, you're obligated to eat in the sukkah on the first night. And so, therefore, on the first night of Sukkot, let's say you sat in a sukkah that has bundles of straw on top of it, as schach. What would be the law? Would you have to go back and eat in another sukkah that night, the first night of Sukkot? What do you think? Would you need to go to your friend's sukkah? You have a sukkah that only has bundles of straw on top, which is a problem, as we're seeing, because someone, you put it there for the right purpose. You put it there for shade, but it seems like it's a problem. Our Mishnah says, you can't use it for schach, it's a rabbinic decree. It might come to putting it there to dry out, and you'll leave it there because you think Sukkot is coming, and you just leave it there, and so you might have so the rabbi. So you can't. Not a good sukkah. That's the problem. What happens if you ate there? Is it okay? At least you ate there. Do you have to go to your friend's sukkah afterwards and say, "Oh, I just realized my sukkah has these bundles of straw"? Would you have to go to another sukkah to eat? Anyone? Any thoughts?
The answer is yes, it's okay, but you shouldn't do it.
And why are you saying that, Ezra?
Because the bundling is a rabbinical, you had the proper intent, and so therefore you should be able to use the fact that you used it as a sukkah, as a valid sukkah, to satisfy the requirements of sitting in the sukkah and eating there.
So you fulfilled the biblical obligation, you want to say.
Right.
But you didn't fulfill the rabbinic obligation. So this is the thing. What you're saying is, I guess it's good enough because, listen, at least the Torah says to do this. You did it. You did it kosher according to biblical law. You fulfilled your biblical obligation. Now, the problem is, but the rabbi said that it's not kosher. So how do we see that? Do we see that as, well, the rabbis said you would need to redo it? And so Tosfos says, if you use the words lechatchila b'diavad, you're going to get the wrong impression here. You're going to end up making this mistake and thinking the way, following the way we just heard, which is because it says the word lechatchila b'diavad. And it says in the Gemara, b'diavad, like it sounds like lechatchila, you need to do it this way. And I think that's why, I think that's where anyone could make a mistake. When you read the words lechatchila in b'diavad in the Gemara, it makes it sound that this is the preferable way, ideal way. And this is the, if you did it after the fact, b'diavad, you already did it, it's okay. So it gives off the wrong impression, makes it sound like it's okay after the fact. So if you look in the top Tosfos over here on page 12b, he says, Ein mesachken behem betchila mishum gzeras oitzer. Tosfos says, Lo garsinon lechatchila You should not say the word lechatchila that this is the ideal way to do it, preferable way. Did the Yevid nami loy mahani midrabanan? Because even the Yevid, if you did it already, it's not going to work rabbinically. Mid ka amar hamidaraisa shaper dami mashma aval midrabanan loy. Since it says biblically it's okay, it's clearly spelling out, it's implying that rabbinically this would not be okay, and you would actually need to go back and go to your friend's house and eat inside a kosher sukkah. So that's why Tosfos removes this word lechatchila, and according to this understanding, which is pretty much like a standard way of learning the Gemara, is that if the rabbi said you can't do it, they're actually saying that after the fact, you got to go and do it right. You got to go and fix it, because rabbinically, this is not considered a kosher. You didn't fulfill your mitzvah of sukkah. Yeah, biblically you fulfilled it, but rabbinically you haven't fulfilled it. So the bottom line is that however you learn the Gemara, if you did it wrong, you will need to go back. Tosfos says, therefore, let's remove the word lechatchila, and then you won't have this. You won't get into this mistake of the mistaken way of thinking. Yes.
So is Tosafot saying that the text is a girsa and it's incorrect, or he's saying we shouldn't read it that way, even though it says that? In other words, how does Tosafot come say the words in the Gemara shouldn't be read this way? In other words, he's saying it's
a good question. It seems that there might have been different versions of the Gemara that might have one saw. Some had that word, some didn't. And it boiled down to the fact that, it was, the logic behind it should have meant the same thing. It's just you might get the wrong impression from that word. So, in other words, the fact that the word is there is not changing the halacha, but it could send you the wrong impression, and therefore Tosfos says better if you don't have that word there. But it seems like maybe that there were two different gersos, and Tosfos says let's not use this one. Okay, so the other way of learning it, if we leave out the word lechatchila, so then we have it as follows. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Lach, again, I'm on the bottom of 12a, and now I'm going to read it without the word lechatchila. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Lach, Rabbi Yochanan will tell you, here it says, don't use this for schach. Here it's who the ein masachin mishum gzeras oitzer. Here is where you don't use it for schach because of a decree. Hadaraisa shaper dummy, but biblically this would be good. It's only a rabbinic decree, but biblically this would be okay. And therefore, Rabbi Yochanan learns our Mishnah to be a rabbinic decree, not a biblical one. Hasam over there, diktani ain't a sukkah, where it says such harsh words. It's not a sukkah. Afilu di'eved, even b'di'eved, or actually Tosfos would probably remove these words as well, because it sort of goes hand in hand with the lechatchila from the other, the contrasting statement. So here, where it says ain't a sukkah, so Hasam diktani ain't a sukkah, there where it says ain't a sukkah, midaraisa nami ain't a sukkah, biblically it's also not a sukkah. So it's also not a sukkah biblically in the case of taking out chotet begadish, where you're removing bundles in order to have space, in order to dwell in your sukkah. There, it's actually a biblical law that you are not yotze, because we're going to learn it that the case is talking about where you didn't lift up, you didn't shake the schach, and therefore it's a real case of tasav layman hasi. So that's that is the Gemara's answer to Rav Ashi's question of why would you learn it this way and not the other way. Here it sounds like it's rabbinic. There it sounds like it's biblical, and in both cases you're not going to be yotze. So that, just to conclude and clarify, in both cases, if you did it wrong, you didn't fulfill the mitzvah. You're going to have to go and use a kosher sukkah, whether it's rabbinic or biblical. Yes, David.
Before you sign off, I just put into the chat. I found this source, and there's a thing called Halachapedia, and it has the whole rules of if there's a machlekes between this rabbi and that rabbi, and like we were talking last time about Rav and Shmuel, and the different rabbis. If there's a machlekes between this pair and that pair, and it all has the whole printout over there. So if you bring it up and print it, or just save that page, you can have the whole rules. I thought it was really good.
Yeah. Okay, sounds good. Sounds good. It's there are rules to who the halacha follows, and it always gets interesting why the Rambam paskin this way. You always find exceptions, and the question is, so why did he paskin this way when the rule is supposed to be the other way, which we've seen before. We just saw a case. Just the previous Gemara, we had the case where we're paskening like Shmuel, even though the halacha normally follows Rav. But the whole Gemara followed this logic of Shmuel. So that was the exception to the case. And here also, with regard to this argument, it seems to be an exception to the case why we're paskening like Rabbi Eliezer when the halacha should follow Rabbi Akiva for various reasons. One is it always follows Rabbi Akiva when one person argues with him, but also the halacha normally doesn't follow Rabbi Eliezer because he was shamuti, which means he was from Shammai, according to some understanding. So therefore, wouldn't follow Rabbi Eliezer. So that was the case there. So thank you for bringing that up, David, and putting it here. Okay. All right. I guess we're going to stop here. Zai gesund, everyone, and we'll see you later, Mitzvah Shem, for the archaeology course. If as I kept on trying to push it, everyone's invited. You don't have to pay. It's part of the program. If anyone wants to enjoy some Jerusalem archaeology with a lot of insights from Tanakh, it's should be really nice this afternoon at 3:00. So anyone that was thinking of skipping it, encouraging you to come.
Are you serving refreshments?
Whatever your wife gives you, that's what you'll have.
Rabbi, is it the same? It's the same link as this class?
It's the same link. Yeah. The same link. Yeah.
Okay.
3:00. You can invite your spouses. And, yeah.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay. Very good.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Good son.
Go on.
Bye.
Okay.
Good, everybody.
Yeah.